the point I make, and this is in chapter 5 of the book, there's been enough talk and some science and publicity is said around the physical effects of the virus and the pandemic, but I don't underestimate the mental health aspects of this. And this, by the way, this is another reason lockdowns don't work. Lockdowns kill more people than they save. You could probably find somebody who got locked down and you say, well, gee, she'd be dead today if she wasn't locked down. I mean, that person probably exists. But what about the fact that the suicide rate has tripled? The murder rate has doubled. Alcohol abuse, drug abuse, domestic abuse, people who skipped cancer treatments and heart treatments died of heart attacks because of the lockdown. So, and the evidence is that, and this is not just speculation, a lot of data is out there. I didn't have the data, not all of it anyway, last April and May when I started writing the book, but over the course of the summer, the data came in and it bears out what I'm saying. So the lockdowns have killed more people than they've saved. They have not stopped the spread of the virus. And what you do, you lock the place down. Maybe for a very short period of time, you contain the spread a little bit. But then what do? You're gonna martial law. You're gonna be locked down the rest of your life. So then they ease up, and all of a sudden there's this a huge outburst, an explosion of the virus, and you're back where you started from, probably worse. And then you lock it down again, like wash, rinse and repeat. So,
yeah. And you didn't mention that people's immune systems become weaker too. That's another part.
That's right. I mentioned that in the book. You're right. I haven't mentioned that yet, but there's more than one virus and bacteria floating around, and by just going outside and interacting, going to a bar or whatever, we get exposed to those other viruses and bacteria. And then, of course, they're not as lethal as coronavirus, but they can make you sick, and you build up immunities to those. Well, when you're locked down, maybe you're avoiding the coronavirus, but you're weakening your immune system relative to all those other pathogens. And so it's another problem coming out of the so-called lockdown, which is you'll probably get sick of something else. So look, it just doesn't work. And in the book, in chapter 2, I go through the history. Well, where did this lockdown idea come from? Well, it was in a paper, in a study in the Centers for Disease Control. Where did that come from? I traced it all the way back to 2005 during the avian flu, when George Bush was president, and he read a book on the Spanish flu, a very good book, by the way, called The Great Influenza by John Barry. But Bush kind of freaked out a little bit. He said, we need a plan. Well, they came up with a plan that was devised by a guy who was a modeler at the Sandia National Laboratory in New Mexico, who didn't know anything about disease, and a toy model that his 14-year-old daughter had come up with. She won a junior high school science project prize. Great. But that then morphed into this study. It was carried on through the Bush administration, the Obama administration. And then when the Trump administration needed it, they pulled it off the shelf. Well, it was an instant return to the Middle Ages. And there's a very prominent scholar, D.A. Henderson. He passed away a few years ago, but he was credited with leading the movement to eradicate smallpox. And we did eradicate smallpox in the 1970s, and D.A. Henderson is given most of the credit for that. He won the the Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian honor, kind of equivalent to the Congressional Medal of Honor, and was dean of the Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins. So you sort of can't get any more credentialed or accomplished than that. And he said lockdowns don't work, and I quote his study in the book. So that's clear. But they're not good at stopping the spread of the virus, but they're very good at destroying the economy, and that's what we did. But they cause all these other, even if you don't have the disease, even if you are immunized or you had it and you recovered and you got the antibodies, the lockdown still affects you mentally. It causes depression, anger, anxiety, and ultimately violence. So I trace some of the, not the sole cause, but some of the violence we saw last summer in all these Antifa riots and the violence we saw yesterday on Capitol Hill, in part because people's anger level is so high because of the lockdown.
Before we continue, help us by smashing that YouTube like button and subscribe now to this channel. This shows the algorithm that you value the information, and it helps us spread this message. Sharing is caring. Please like and subscribe now. Thank you. And now let's continue.
If you look back to the spark that ignited this, you look back to George Floyd, just think of his situation. So he was arrested for counterfeiting, and he lost his job because the place he worked as a bouncer was closed. okay, that business was closed.
Right.
And so he had to have money. And that was before any of the stimulus, I think. I could be wrong on that, but I think it was.
I think you're right.
And so he was counterfeiting. And, there we go. That led to the whole thing, right? It may have never happened if he had been able to keep his job, right? So,
yeah, the police officers were arrested and they've been charged with one of them charged with second-degree murder. They're going to go on trial. Some, you're innocent until proven guilty and let justice take its course. But these riots, many of them were justified in the name of George Floyd. Well, I could see, peaceful protest. You want to call your congressman, you want a peaceful march. That's fine. That's the American way. That's the First Amendment, not smashing the windows and burning down stores. I don't care. The timing was had a direct economic impact because you go back to, so March, April, May was the first lockdown. The George Floyd death was the end of May, and the riots broke out in June, July, and August. Now, what else was happening in July? Well, that was right around the time when the mayors and governors are saying, okay, now we can reopen. The worst is over. Looks like we got the virus contained, et cetera. We can reopen. Well, no sooner did the bodegas and the coffee shops and the restaurants and the bars reopen, here come the riots, and they're getting the windows smashed, and they're burned out, and they're police in the streets, and they're boarded up. So imagine you're a small business person. You've just gone through 3 months. Half of them are bankrupt, okay, but the half that kind of survived and try to reopen. Now you got a crowbar smashed through your window. And then now today you got a second wave, which is worse than the first wave. Again, right. More evidence that lockdowns don't work. So, and there you get into this difference between perception and reality. So you look at the stock market. So the stock market indices are at all-time highs. I think the S&P hit a new all-time high today. The Dow Jones and NASDAQ, they're all close to their all-time highs. And so people say, well, it went down 30% in March, but it's come back 70%. It's at a new all-time high. My 401k is restored. What's the problem? It looks all good. Well, the answer is that the stock market no longer bears any relation to the real economy. The S&P 500 is the S&P 7. And the reason is that's a cap-weighted index, meaning your influence on the index is a function of your market capitalization. Well, there are 7 stocks, and we know what they are. It's Apple, Amazon, Netflix, right. Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Tesla. Okay, those 7 stocks are 40% of the market cap of the entire S&P.
Right.
So it's best understood as the S&P 7. And by the way, those companies are also the least affected by the pandemic. They're not bricks and mortar. They're telecommunications, they're digital, they're advertising, they're online shopping, et cetera. So 7 companies are 40% of the S&P market cap. They're least affected by the pandemic. And yes, their stocks are going up and their earnings are going up as well. But that means the S&P doesn't reflect the economy, because that's not the real economy. How are the other 493 stocks doing? Well, the answer is they're not doing very well. They're flat to down. And what about the real economy? When I say real economy, I mean restaurants, bars, nail salons, gyms, dry cleaners, bodegas, boutique retailers, et cetera.
The terrible, I think, side effects of this whole pandemic is the massive consolidation that is occurring toward the top. The big are getting bigger, and everybody else is going to need UBI, Universal Basic Income, to survive. Right. Because and this may well be very engineered, or it's just a massively helpful coincidence to the central planners who like this idea.
No, that's exactly what Mark Zuckerberg wants. And Mark Zuckerberg gave, I think, a commencement address at Harvard. He never graduated, but he got an honorary degree and was a commencement speaker. And he talked about UBI, but that's what they want. They want a world where, 10 or 20 or maybe a couple hundred people control everything. And the rest of us are just getting welfare checks. And they say, hey, stay home, watch football, play video games. Here's your check.
Bread and circuses. Yeah.
Correct. Except maybe we only get this. Yeah, I guess you get bread and circuses if you count the NFL. So the point being, that is what they want. And, Rahm Emanuel famously said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Well, this is a good crisis, and they're not letting it go to waste. But getting back to the, people look down their noses at small and medium-sized enterprises. They say, well, you're a restaurant with 20 employees, big deal. You're not Boeing, you're not Apple Computer. Well, I have news for you. Those small and medium-sized enterprises make up 50% of all jobs and 45% of GDP. So individually, they may be small, but in the aggregate, they are half the economy. And you've just crushed half the economy. Small and medium-sized enterprises, again, your bars, restaurants, salons, et cetera, are 50% of all jobs and 45% of GDP.
Okay, so that's half of all jobs and almost half of the entire country's GDP.
Correct, and we've just crushed it.
What to do in such a situation? Inform yourself and keep your financial education strong. We from the Compact Group offer our loyal subscribers a free educational portal with first-hand monetary, financial, and economic knowledge. Enter our invite-only Insider Club by clicking the link below. You will get access to first-class information far earlier than the rest. We have prepared a special deal for all our members where you can access a giant pool of Robert Kiyosaki's financial wisdom for just $1. To find out more, simply click the link below and join our Insider Club absolutely free. But there is more you can and should do. Build up several streams of income. More and more people realize that they have to take their future in their own hands, but they don't know how and where to start. We from Compact offer our Insider Club members unique opportunities. Strengthen your financial muscle and get the edge. Click the link below. Become part of our free Insider Club. No financial obligations. But there's one important thing you have to know. You have to become active. So do it now. Become active and see you on the other side.